Okay, just let me know when we are live, or if we are, then. All right, beautiful. Cool. Hi, Ron. I'm Auryn. I hope you're all having a blast in Paris. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I'm really excited to share some of the things that we've been working on at Gnosis, in particular, bringing off-chain voting on-chain. So DAOs are not monoliths. They're not the monoliths of the old world. They are constellations. They're multi-organizational networks of people, communities, organizations, mediated by smart contracts and native to the internet. Gnosis has been building multi-sig wallets since 2017, and the Gnosis Safe, which was launched in 2019, has become a core piece of Ethereum's infrastructure. It currently secures about 35 billion in assets for individuals, families, teams, businesses, DeFi protocols, and DAOs. But the Gnosis Safe is much more than a multi-sig. The Gnosis Safe interface that you have more than likely interacted with hides the fact that under the hood, the Gnosis Safe is a programmable, flexible, and modular contract account standard. So one advantage that contract accounts offer is transaction batching. Projects like Omen and Circles have been using the Gnosis Safe contract proxy kit under the hood of their applications to create friendly user experience. So essentially batching transactions together so that you only click once where multiple things kind of happen under the hood. This is really great for things like the ERC20 approve and then transact flow. The contract proxy kit can kind of abstract that away from users in some cases. Another major advantage is modularity. So the Gnosis Safe allows you to decouple the account, the thing that holds funds, interacts with systems, and generally represents you or your organization on chain, decouple that from the logic that controls it. So in practice, what this means is that you can frictionlessly change from one control mechanism to another without the coordination costs that would typically be involved with migrating assets and references to your organization's address. What I mean by this is, let's say you launch an organization on-chain using Aragon. And after 6 months, the organization decides that it would prefer to use colony-style governance. You now need to coordinate around migrating any assets and tokens that the Aragon DAO controls, along with updating the permissions or any other contracts or systems that the Aragon DAO controls or interacts with, and updating any external references to the Aragon DAO's address on-chain. What this effectively creates is a massive coordination cost, and then the byproduct of that is essentially silos, platform lock-in, where the switching costs are high enough to deter most users from actually migrating, even if they see another setup that they would prefer to use. Now let's imagine the same organization with a little more foresight. So it deploys a Gnosis Safe to hold its assets, control its systems, and to be the organization's avatar on chain. The organization then launches its Aragon DAO and uses it to control its Gnosis Safe. 6 months later, the organization decides it would like to, or prefer to use colony-style governance. So they deploy a new colony, get it all set up, and then execute a proposal to enable it as a module on their Gnosis Safe. Now the two DAO frameworks exist in parallel and are both controlling the Gnosis Safe, but once they're comfortable that the colony is working as expected, they execute a proposal in the colony to remove the Aragon DAO as a module. So at no point did assets need to be moved, permissions and external systems need to be changed, or references to the organization's address need to be updated. The migration is seamless and secure. I know this is meant to be a talk on bringing off-chain governance on-chain, and we'll get there, I promise. But if you take nothing else home from this talk, this is the point I want you to remember. As a best practice, the DAO space must start to decouple accounts from control logic. This is a really key piece to enabling the kind of permissionless composability that fueled DeFi's explosive growth over the last few years. Essentially, in DeFi's case, the ability to take the output of one system and use it as input for another system, and then chain together those systems to create really kind of complex products. In the case of DAOs, the same is kind of true there, where the ability to permissionlessly couple together disparate systems that weren't explicitly built to operate with one another, but that have been built in such a way that they are actually composable, will allow a much more kind of interesting and much larger design space for people trying to create DAO-like structures. So speaking of DeFi, around this time last year, gas prices surged from single digits to consistently over 100 gwei, and spiking to over 1,000 gwei in times of really extreme congestion. This broke one of the fundamental assumptions that almost every DAO framework had based their designs on, that gas prices would be low enough for governance to cost effectively happen on chain. Snapshot emerged as a really well-timed reaction to this. It quickly saw adoption and arguably contributed to the explosive growth of DeFi in the spring of last year. Many new and established organizations seeking to progressively decentralize chose to use Snapshot's free off-chain signaling to empower their community with a voice. For anyone that hasn't used Snapshot, essentially anyone can create a proposal, and then you vote on proposals by signing a message that is not actually published on chain, but is published to IPFS, where anyone can kind of transparently audit all of the messages, and it's timestamped by by Snapshot's hub server. A whole bunch of organizations kind of adopted this as the easy way to give their community a voice. In most cases, the community's will was and still is carried out on-chain by a group of trusted community members who are signers on a Gnosis safe. Now, this is a really practical and functional first step on the progressive decentralization journey. But in an ideal world, a DAO should not have to rely on and trust a small group of people that with everything it owns. Indeed, it was while weighing up the pros and cons of the DAO frameworks, the existing DAO frameworks, in the lead up to launching the Gnosis DAO, that we realized nothing that existed at the time solved for both permissionless control and gas-free voting. So leaning into the safe snapshot pattern that had already become the de facto standard, we set out to build a module to the Gnosis safe that would allow DAOs to permissionlessly turn their off-chain decisions into on-chain execution. The result was the Gnosis Safe DAO module and the SafeSnap plugin for Snapshot. Now, rather than having a Snapshot instance plus a Gnosis Safe multi-sig, organizations can directly control their Gnosis Safe via a proposal on Snapshot. So this provides a clear pathway to progressive decentralization, taking the guesswork and worry out of an exit to community, and allowing projects to start with a multi-sig and take incremental steps to hand over control of their ecosystem. So in this example, we envision a four-step pathway, starting with a Gnosis Safe multi-sig on the left, adding in a governance mechanism, Snapshot, to measure the community opinion, then adding in SafeSnap to give the community a more direct control over their safe, while the multi-sig also retains full control in parallel. And then finally, removing the multi-sig signers altogether. And we actually have an upcoming feature here as well that will insert another step between those last two, where you'll essentially be able to empower the multi-sig signers with the ability to veto Snapshot or SafeSnap transactions that are coming through, but not do anything else. So you essentially drastically limit the scope of what the multi-sig signers are allowed to do. So they can kind of take on that veto role, that backstop or safeguard role, but they can't run away with all the money, or they can't kind of mess with any other systems or anything like that. But that's not yet released, so kind of not factored into this progressive decentralization pathway. All right, so how does it work and what are the trust assumptions? We start with a Gnosis Safe and an instance of Snapshot. Then we deploy an instance of our DAO module contract and enable it as a module on our Gnosis Safe. Using the SafeSnap plugin, anyone can create a proposal on Snapshot that includes some on-chain transaction that should be executed by the Gnosis Safe if the proposal passes. When a proposal passes, anyone can call the add proposal function on the DAO module contract, which queries an oracle, reality.eth, for the outcome of the Snapshot proposal. The oracle reports the outcome back to the DAO module, and after a cooldown period, anyone can call the execute proposal function on the DAO module to trigger on-chain execution of the proposed transaction from the Gnosis Safe. So essentially here we're relying on this oracle to report the off-chain events truthfully on-chain. So the oracle is the key to the system working. It's what allows anyone to permissionlessly bring results of the off-chain proposal on-chain to validate whether or not a given transaction should be allowed to be executed by the Gnosis safe. Reality is an escalation game-based oracle. So in other words, it's secured by game theory. Anyone can post a question to which anyone else can post an answer. However, to post an answer, you must provide a bond that is at least double the bond or double any previously provided bond for an answer to that question. So each time a new bond is posted, a timeout is reset, and that timeout is 24 hours by default. If at any time the timeout ends without anyone doubling the bond, the answer is considered final. At this point, assuming the question is properly formatted and the bond is equal to or greater than the minimum bond set in the DAO module, anyone can use that answer to trigger the associated transaction in the Gnosis safe. You can optionally include an arbitration option like Kleros, which can be used or can be called instead of continuing to play the escalation game. And just a side note here, that setup, reality.eth plus Kleros is the kind of oracle setup for the Omen prediction market as well. So one really cool thing about this architecture is that it's agnostic to the decision-making mechanism. So while Snapshot was the obvious first choice for integrations, we could easily import decisions from just about anywhere. That could be discourse forum discussion, Twitter polls, or Discord polls, for example. And the friendly robots over at Collabland have already started working on an integration with our DAO module that will allow a Discord community to own and control a Gnosis safe. If you're in Paris right now, you should definitely touch base with James and the rest of the Collabland crew to check out a demo of this setup. All right, so let's switch gears for a little bit. I'm gonna try for the ever reliable live demo here. So we'll be going through the process of creating and executing a Gnosis safe transaction using the SafeSnap plugin for Snapshot. There are a couple of cooldown periods, and since we'll be doing this live on Rinkeby, some delays while we wait for transactions to confirm. So this is also a good time to shoot through questions on chat, and I'll try to answer them as we go. Bear with me while I just switch screens here. So here we've got our snapshot proposal, or our snapshot space. This one is the Venus space. For anyone who hasn't played with it before, Venus is a token created by Baki Puba, and it's essentially anyone can mint basically as much of it as they want. So it's a great token for testing with. So what we're going to do here is just jump in and create a new proposal. And I'm just going to send myself some tokens. We'll send 13 tokens to me. Just make this a little bit shorter. There we go. Didn't work. Up into outcomes. It's important that you always have a no outcome, essentially something that is the equivalent of do nothing. As of right now, the module only supports binary outcomes, so yes or no. In future, we may look at doing things like multiple choice outcomes, in which case you would still always have to have a kind of negative outcome. This snapshot space is controlling the Gnosis safe at this address. So if we follow this link here, we can check out this Gnosis safe. You can see it holds a balance of this Venus token, and it has one owner that is an invalid address. This is kind of a quirk of the current way that the Gnosis safe multisig works, in that you can't remove all of the signers. So we hack that a little bit and just put in an obviously invalid address. And then it is now controlled exclusively by this DAO module, which if we load it up on Etherscan here, we can see the verified source code. So if you want to go and check that out, you most certainly can. So we'll jump back into Snapshot here. I'm going to hit add transaction batch. And just to explain this quickly first, what you're doing here is actually creating batches of transactions. So I mentioned earlier that one of the cool features of kind of an account, a contract account, is that you can batch transactions together. So here, what we're doing is actually defining an array of batches of transactions. So each batch in this array is executed separately on chain. So these are separate transactions, but every transaction that you build within a batch gets executed in one transaction. All of the transactions within a batch get executed in the order that you define them. And then each of the batches of transactions can only be executed in the order that you define them here. So you have really precise control on how you batch them, in what order each of the transactions go, and whether or not they are executed within one transaction or in multiple transactions. So in this case, I'm just going to set up a nice easy transfer, and it was to send me 13 wieners, right? So just so that we can use multiple transactions here, I'm going to switch accounts. Just so that we can use multiple transactions here, I'm going to do one for 6 wieners, and then I'm going to do the same thing and one for 7 wieners. So now we have our 2 transactions confirmed in one batch. I'm going to delete this batch here. And that is our proposal defined. The next thing we need to do is just pick our start date and time. So for this one, I'm going to pick today's date, which is the 21st. And for me, it is just after 10. So I'm just going to leave it at 10 a.m. And then I'm going to pick 10:13, we'll say that, as the end date, or maybe 10:14, just to give me time to vote. 13 should be fine. I can be quick. Let's make that 10. Cool. So I'll hit publish here. I need to sign a message. I don't know if you guys can see my MetaMask pop up, but if you could, you would notice that it includes the whole description of this proposal, including the details for each of these transactions. I can open that up on IPFS here in a minute. So here's our proposal. I'm going to hit vote. I'll vote yes on this because I want this to happen. Great. So now I've got my vote in, and we can quickly take a look at this IPFS document. It's a little bit hard to read here because it's not kind of formatted very friendly for a human to read, but you should be able to see here that, let's have a look. We've got a couple of transactions defined. So we can see here our transfer funds to an address, and then the amount was 6, and then transfer funds to an address, and the amount was 7. Where did it go? Here we go. The amount was 7. So that's essentially what our proposal will look like. And yeah, we can now, as soon as this proposal closes, we are waiting for, it should have already closed. So I'm just going to refresh this. Cool. So the vote's closed. And now I can go and request execution from our Oracle reality.eth. So again, I'm just going to hit request execution. Anyone can do this. It's a permissionless function or a public function. You hit confirm. And what this is going to do is call the add proposal function on our DAO module contract, which basically then reaches out to reality and creates a question on reality asking if this proposal should be finalized or asking if this proposal here resolved to yes, essentially. We can go and open up this question independently on the reality.eth interface, but we've actually gone and built in all of the functionality that you need here within the plugin. So from here now we can go and change the outcome. The current outcome is set to no. By default, to change the outcome, we need to put down a bond. There's a minimum bond of 0.1 ETH on that was defined in the DAO module attached to this snapshot space. So we can hit yes to set the outcome with a 0.1 ETH bond. And then it's going to have a 3-minute timeout on this outcome. So long as no one comes and changes it, which anyone could, because again, it's permissionless, but so long as no one comes and changes it in the meantime, then our outcome should finalize. In the meantime, we can go and take a look at the reality interface to make sure that it's shown up there as well. I'm just waiting on Rinkeby to do its thing. But let's jump over to reality.eth. I don't know if I can actually do that from... Great. Okay, so our outcome has been set, finalized in 2 minutes. So we just need to wait for that cooldown. I was hoping to be able to jump over to a new window, but I'm not sure that I have an easy pathway to do it while I'm in full screen mode. So here we go. Although we want the Rinkeby version, don't we? Evidently their app is down. The ever reliable live demo strikes again. So we'll, I guess this is probably the eth.link domain being down. So we'll hold off on that then, and we'll hang out here for a minute while we wait for this bond or this question to finalize. In the meantime, I'm going to check back and just make sure that we don't have any questions that have come through. I don't see anything in the YouTube chat, so I think we're all good. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Yeah, so we don't have kind of a browser extension type system right now. The way that you can do it, I guess there's two different ways. One is you can drop in an ABI. That's not the ABI. Let's drop that in as the to address. I'll go grab the ABI for this contract. So I know it's filled it out by itself. Great. So here we drop in an address that has verified source code into this contract interaction transaction type. And then we can basically just interact with the ABI. So this is a reasonably accessible way of doing it, but obviously it requires some knowledge of how the contract works and what parameters what the parameters going into this ABI should look like and what the results are going to be. So it's not a super user-friendly way of doing it. The other way that we have is that you can just drop in literally raw transaction data. So just a string of bytes here that correspond to the function calls that you want to do. So if you want to go and craft your transaction somewhere else and then just drop in the data, you can do it here. What we are hoping to build is, and we have kind of a simple proof of concept for at the moment, is a way to basically impersonate the safe on a mainnet fork, and then go and interact with a bunch of dApps and queue up a whole bunch of transactions that you then just import over into the plugin. But that's is still kind of very early stages. So for the time being, probably the most user-friendly way to do things that aren't just fund transfers and NFT transfers is with the contract interaction here by just dropping in the address and or the ABI to the contract that you want to interact with. No worries. So we can jump back over now to our, I don't know if that might have, I'll just leave it like this. So we'll jump back over here now. Our proposal should have, so our timeout's finished. So now I can hit the claim bond. to claim back my bond for setting the outcome because it was not challenged, and it ultimately resolved to the answer that I set. And then once I've claimed back this bond, only I see this window, by the way. Anyone else would just see the next step. But once this transaction is confirmed, then the plugin here is going to update and show me one more time out here. This is basically a cooldown. So the idea here being that you have a cooldown from when the question finally resolves on reality to when it can actually be executed in the Gnosis safe. And this is to allow time for another control mechanism. This might be your multi-sig signers if they still exist on the safe, or it might be some other DAO mechanism that you've permissioned through a module. Just allow time for these other mechanisms to act as a backstop if the proposal that's come through is malicious. So this is your opportunity to basically jump into your DAO module and call the mark proposal as invalid function here. And basically that will do is block this transaction from being executed. And so if you were to do that, your proposal ID is this, the IPFS hash of this proposal, and then the transaction, the TX hashes parameter is the hash of the concatenation of each of these transactions. So that one's a bit more painful to produce, but we'll have some tools to make that a bit easier at some point as well. So we should be able to execute now. Perfect. So now we have this button here, execute transaction 1 of 1. In our case, it's just one batch of transactions for two transfers. So I'm going to hit execute transaction here. And once that goes through and the Gnosis safe transaction service kind of catches up, we should see it show up here in the transaction history. So the last one was July 8th. This one's been a little bit inactive, but we should see that show up here momentarily. And that, when it does show up, is essentially the whole flow for creating, resolving, and then executing a transaction. There we go. Module transaction with 2 actions. So the safe interface is actually really nice in that it decodes these transactions. So transfer 1 and transfer 2. And so that's it. We've essentially created a proposal, defined transactions within the proposal, had that proposal resolve, queried the reality.eth oracle to get the outcome of this proposal, and then use that to trigger this transaction in the Gnosis safe. I should say this batch of transactions in the Gnosis safe. Now, if we had have created multiple batches of transactions here, then these would have been executed as 2 separate transactions here in the safe. And here where it said 1 of 1, it would have said 1 of 2 and then 2 of 2, and it would have had to actually make 2 separate Ethereum transactions. And so that can be really useful for situations where you, for whatever reason, cannot put the transactions into the same block. So, maybe you have a transaction that's using up enough gas that, or that like a combination of transactions that would use up more than the gas limit or more than you would reasonably be able to fit into a block. Or maybe you have something that's got a reentrancy guard or something like that that's going to block you from doing it in one transaction. And so in that case, you would kind of put it into batches of transactions. But otherwise, wherever possible, it makes sense to try to batch them all together, just to save on the kind of coordination costs and save on the actual gas costs of making individual transactions. So yeah, that's essentially the whole process. Again, I'm happy to kind of take questions. For everyone that made it this far, check out Gnosis Guild on Twitter. This is where we'll drop updates on all of the awesome kind of new DAO tooling that we're working on. This is a relatively recent shift in direction for kind of one of the internal teams at Gnosis. So we're going to be kind of releasing a whole bunch of DAO tooling to really help to kickstart this idea of much more modular and composable DAO tooling. If you want to learn more about SafeSnap, you can jump into our Discord server at chat.gnosis.io or our forum at forum.gnosis.io. And this is absolutely an open invite to come and build a more composable future for the DAO ecosystem. If you're working on your own project, please get in touch with us and let us know how we can help. We'd love to collaborate around kind of helping to make your project more composable, help it to kind of plug into this ecosystem and kind of leverage the tooling that we're building, as well as allowing existing DAOs to leverage the tools that you're building. And if you're looking to get involved with the DAO space, we're hiring for multiple technical and non-technical roles, so please reach out. Thanks for tuning into the talk, everyone. I'm Auryn, and you can find me on Twitter at Auryn_Macmillan. And if we still have time, I haven't kept track of it very well, then I'm totally open to doing taking some more questions and kind of diving back through anything if there's anything that was not clear. Right. Yeah. So I mean, the only limit really is the block limit, like the block gas limit. So if you can fit it within a block, and then you can get that transaction mined, then there's no real limit to it. Obviously, like the closer to the block limit, the block gas limit you push your transaction side, the harder it's going to be to get it mined, because it kind of necessarily means the transaction, the miner probably losing out on some MEV for other transactions. So, unless if you have a giant transaction like that, then you probably need to pay a really, really high gas price to actually get it mined. So that's the kind of, I guess, practical limit there. It's just the gas limit and how big you can make a transaction to get it kind of mined in a reasonable amount of time. But outside of that, this can be as arbitrarily complex as you want. You can create kind of as many different transactions in each of these batches as you want. They can have any combination of different features. They can be contract interactions. You can drop in raw data. You can transfer any amount of funds, anything like that. And then you can make as many batches as you want. So this can get really, really, really deep and really complex quite quickly. So again, just to reiterate here, everything within this batch happens in one transaction and gets executed in order. And then each of these batches are separate Ethereum transactions, and they must be executed in order as well. One caveat to think about there as well is that if, say, you create this kind of array of 4 transactions in a batch, and for whatever reason, batch 2 will always fail, then batch 3 and 4 can never be executed. This one has to successfully execute in order to be able to execute the following transactions. I guess maybe if we're kind of waiting on other questions, maybe I'll talk a little bit and just kind of tease some of the other things that we're working on. I talked about kind of making this more composable DAO ecosystem. And one part of that, I think, is really realizing this vision of DAOs being these kind of constellations of people and tools, as opposed to kind of these, I guess, like thinking of DAOs as essentially like a silo, thinking of it as a contract or as kind of one particular system. They can be much more complex, and the kind of design space can be much more wide open. And so one way that we've been thinking about this is this idea of obviously like decoupling the account standard from the mechanisms that are controlling it and from the other mechanisms that the account is controlling, making these kind of composable pieces. And the really cool thing, or one really cool thing that I think that enables is then the idea of essentially like one control structure controlling multiple different accounts. And so in that case, like right now we have one Gnosis safe that's being controlled by this snapshot, but there's no reason that this snapshot instance couldn't control a suite of Gnosis safes. And then there's no reason that those Gnosis safes couldn't then control more Gnosis safes or kind of other systems. Couldn't be the owner of a DeFi protocol, for example, and set the variables in a DeFi protocol. And then I think the really neat thing that we've actually already built and haven't kind of announced yet, so don't tell anyone. But we built a way of controlling a Gnosis safe on one side of an arbitrary message bridge from an address on the other side. And so like in a practical sense, what that means is things like being able to have, say, a colony deployed on XDAI that can control a Gnosis safe on mainnet. And so effectively what we're doing is allowing an organization to kind of choose a home chain, one where they're happy with the trust assumptions and happy with the cost of execution, but then extend their reach out to other chains. And so we kind of imagine an environment now where you have, say, an organization chooses XDAI as its home chain, but is able to still have a representation, an avatar, an account on mainnet and on Polygon and on Optimism and Arbitrum and anywhere else that's kind of EVM compatible, and there's a suitable message bridge between the two networks. And so we have this safe bridge module that we built already that enables it between XDAI and mainnet and anywhere else that there is a compatible arbitrary message bridge. And this is one of the things that we're really excited about, is these kind of like interdimensional DAOs, interdimensional organizations that can live on one chain but still have a presence and tangibly control a Gnosis safe on another chain. Yes. Yeah, so like the reason for doing something like this would typically be, well, I guess there's probably multiple reasons. One is wanting to have one place that's the kind of canonical place where decisions are made. So if you think about the issue of trying to kind of keep decision-making mechanisms in sync in multiple execution environments, it gets really, really sticky. So say you've got, even with just a multi-sig, say you've got a multi-sig on mainnet, but then you also want to have a presence on XDAI. And multi-sig starts out as a 3 of 5, and then so you deploy an instance of that on XDAI as well, and it's 3 of 5. And then later on, you decide to add some more people to the multi-sig on mainnet and maybe switch out some of the signers. You then have to go and kind of duplicate that action over on XDAI, add some people, switch out some signers, and get everything back in sync. The more networks that you deploy this a kind of instance of this multi-sig to, the more this like syncing problem becomes an issue. Kind of keeping them all in sync becomes an issue. And so like with a multi-sig, that's a pain in the butt. With a DAO, where you're talking about token balances, if it's kind of a DAO with like liquid token balances, then trying to keep like the vote weights in sync across each of these chains is a near impossible task. And so being able to kind of point to one instance of this DAO and say, this is where all of the decisions are going to be made. And then rather than kind of trying to mirror that DAO elsewhere, trying to kind of keep it in sync, we are just going to make all of the decisions here and then bridge our decisions to other chains and have this Gnosis safe be the thing that actually represents the DAO on these other chains and is kind of controlled directly by our chain, our DAO structure on the chain that we live on. You avoid all of that kind of syncing cost, all of the effort to try to keep all of these disparate instances of your organization in sync, and instead just have everything happen in one place. And then from a gas point of view, it means, like say you have an Aragon DAO. This has been a big problem for a lot of Aragon DAOs that launched, a year or two ago on mainnet have now have reached a point where on-chain governance is just not cost-effective for them. They struggle to get voter participation because it costs so much to actually cast a vote. There's been a pretty substantial migration from Aragon deployed on mainnet to instances of Aragon deployed on XDAI to accommodate this, where folks have basically just packed up and left mainnet and deployed onto XDAI. The same is true for Moloch v2 with the DAO house folks or the raid guild folks kind of deploying all of that infrastructure to XDAI, and there's been a whole bunch of projects, including raid guild themselves, that basically migrated all of their operations over to XDAI. And so what this allows you to do is still have this kind of cheap execution on XDAI, but maintain a presence on mainnet. And so it's like the point where you would choose to do this is where the execution costs or the additional kind of gas cost of crossing the bridge with your transaction is less than the kind of aggregate cost of participating in voting on mainnet. Alrighty. Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the chat again. Sorry I couldn't be there to do it in person next year. Fingers crossed. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.